We start with mission. We ask the question, what is it about is in your community that you're doing in order to reach this community? So we want to make sure that we don't skip a step in the very beginning. When we start a project, when we're told that we're going to be working with an organization, the very first thing that we start talking about is tell us who you are and how you meet the community. How do you do this? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And I get the big picture. The big picture is that we're trying to introduce people to a relationship in Christ. But I want to know more specifically how that happens uniquely in your communities. So any of the designers that work with our organization start with this kind of a conversation. Mission leads to activity. We can't have a serious conversation about activity until we start that, which then results in a discussion about facility. So we need to get it in the right order. We don't start with a facility discussion. We start with an understanding that the facility is not a monument to some architect. It's not a monument to a building committee. It's not a monument to a pastor. These buildings are tools to serve in the kingdom to move people towards a relationship in Christ. How does that happen? What is the story that your building conveys to people as they see the building from the outside, as they approach the building, as they come into the building? What are you trying to communicate? The building will communicate something. If it's opulently designed with materials that are exaggerated, costly materials, you're going to convey something to people as they come into the building. If it's designed so that the spaces are uncomfortable for people to be in because they're so dehumanizing. One of the big things that's prevalent in design today is what's called warm industrial. Warm industrial has a really good connotation to somebody 28 years old. But if you're my age and older, warm industrial just feels like industrial. It doesn't matter what color you slap on the wall. It doesn't feel good. So you have to be understanding what the intergenerational aspects of a project are going to be. Generations think differently about space. The truth of the matter is we're not designing today's buildings for the generation that's about ready to pass on in life, right? If we don't start thinking for the next generation, then we're going to miss an opportunity to bring that generation into a conformity with a life in Christ. So we need to think outside our own self. But understanding what kind of a story the church building facility has to say is an important part of it. Every ministry has a unique story. People will all the time say, I've been to such and such a church and we want to do something exactly like this. And sometimes they are missing the fact that what they did in that particular community may or may not apply to this particular community. It happens all the time. I mean, particularly nowadays when families get fractured, they get sent all over the United States for jobs and so forth. And mom and dad have gone to visit somebody down in Florida, and they come back and they say, we took some photographs of this great church, and we're trying to present these photographs to people in northern Minnesota, and they're going, this isn't us. This isn't the way that we relate to the space. This is not the kinds of things that work for us. It's not the space that they feel comfortable in. So we have to be careful not to imitate those kinds of things, but to take what we can and transfer that to the local vernacular, or to the way that people function in that new location. We ask the question, what are your ministry strengths? That's an important question to ask, almost as important as what are your ministry weaknesses? What are the things that you're not able to do that you wish you could because you don't have the facilities to make it work? Sometimes it's a matter of helping them understand things that they don't even see. Sometimes we're working with organizations and they are so close to the issues that they don't see the broader picture. So from our perspective, it's helping them understand things that they're not even aware of. In our first night of a charrette exercise, and again, I'll describe what that means, oftentimes it's an intergenerational discussion. We're trying to help older people understand the perspective of younger people, drawing it out of the younger people to help explain, and vice versa. Having the younger people, I mean, it's true in most churches, the funding for a project isn't coming from the 20-somethings, right? It's coming from people who are established, who've been around for a while, who have the means to be able to make something happen. And sometimes they come in and they'll stake their claim on something. I was in a discussion with a church down in Monroe, Louisiana, one night. There was a group of about 40 people around this big U-shaped table. And one of the individuals in that meeting said, if I'm going to give my money to this project, we are going to have the biggest cross on the front of this building that you can imagine. That's my vision, is a cross to the community. We're going to stake our claim. And another younger fella across the room saying, well, if you're going to do that, I'm not going to this church anymore. Because the cross has become a barrier to some people. So we had this debate for 45 minutes about religious symbology. What's the right way to do this? And the older people in the room largely agreed with the fellow that made the original statement, saying it's important for us to be clear to the community about who we are. We are believers in Christ. The cross is a strong, powerful symbol to who we are. And the younger people saying, yes, but there are people who are unchurched, and back and forth and back and forth. It finally evolved into a discussion between this guy that originally made the statement and this younger guy that had spoken up right after him, and back and forth they went for a few minutes. It turned out it was father-in-law, son-in-law, by the way. And they were having this discussion that had been a continuation of a discussion that they'd had in their own living room over holiday meals and so forth. We eventually, in this project, depicted a cross, but it was a very modern element. It was a very sculptural cross that both organizations, the young and the older people in the church, could live with. The younger people said, that's a relevant symbol. That's cool. We like that. It was very sculptural. And the older people saying, that's a cross. We can see it. Same thing that we did up we had a similar discussion up in Ames, Iowa with an organization. And at the end of the project, they were debating still, do we put a cross on the building or not put a cross? The workmen found out that this debate was going on and went out and found shards of steel that were left over on the project. And one afternoon, with a welder, welded a 40-foot high cross made of shards of steel. It was beautiful. And all they were doing was scabbing pieces of steel together. And the church rallied around this and ended up, and if you drive on the intersection of Interstate 35 headed up to Minneapolis and Iowa Highway 30, you'll look up and see at the end of the project that they scabbed together these shards of steel, and it still erects to this day. People were able to rally around this as a powerful symbol. So these kinds of discussions are going to evolve. Where do we stake our claim? What are the sacred cows? But understanding, what are the strengths? What are the things we're accomplishing? What are the things we're not accomplishing?